In this video, I will show you a recent over-the-board game that I played in the chess club, and there is actually a super interesting middle game strategy that you can learn from this video. So very quickly, before this game, these are the current standings in the club championship. So as you can see, I'm currently in first place, shared first place, missing 1 point since I had 2 draws so far. So let's go into the game. I was playing this with the black pieces, playing against the Collie Zukertort opening, which is actually an opening that I don't really have any preparation against. So I'm just going to breeze through the opening, as the opening is not the most important part, but basically my opponent plays this setup. And as soon as you see this, you can be certain that this is the Collie system, which is basically a more passive opening that white can play, where they usually build this triangle with the pawns. They develop the pieces like this, they just castle, and they hope to have a good middle game. It's actually a great opening. It is also an opening that I used to play, and I still recommend playing this because you don't really need that much opening theory. Even the opening that I play as white is actually this opening, but with the difference that I have another move order, and I don't play the triangle. Instead, I play usually a more aggressive approach with the pawns like this. All right. So with the black pieces, whenever you face a more passive opening by white, it is smart to play more actively, more aggressively. So for example, instead of building a triangle or salves, we are going to play pawn to c5 and challenge the center. And the main goal behind my move here was to see if I could maybe play pawn to c4. And let's say my opponent castles, which did not happen in the game. I could play the move pawn to c4, pawn to b5, and really push on the queen side. And the queen side is the direction where I should play. And I can know this because my central pawns, these two, were facing towards the queen side. So I had to play on the queen side. So that's why I could go for this plan. Instead, my opponent played the very good move, pawn to b3. This actually stops the the c4 push, excuse me, and it also makes sure that this bishop can stay here. Plus, this bishop will go to the b2 square for a fianchetto. So this is really the start of that Collie Zukertort system. It's a variation of this opening. So I played knight to c6, which has the plan of potentially trading the knight for this bishop, because this bishop is really one of the best pieces white has. It's a great attacking piece, and my opponent just plays a3, which stops that plan. Okay, so here I was thinking, like, what is the plan here for black? Because we have to play on the queen side. That's initially the plan that we should go for because of the direction of our pawns aiming towards the queen side. And white is going to usually play some knight e5 move and try to attack on the king side. So the first thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to just play b6, bishop b2, and bishop to b7. But as I said before, my opponent is playing a bit passively, so I want to grab space, which means I want to push pawns further up the board if I can. So instead of playing this b6 move, I play to move a6. And the plan behind a6 is to play b5 and then fianchetto the bishop, which is the same plan, but our pawns are just a little bit further up the board, which is going to give us more space. And that's a good plan to use against passive opponents. Space always means squares, and the further up the board your pawns are, the more squares you attack, and also the more squares you have behind your pawns to place your pieces. All right, opponent plays bishop to b2, and here I should probably just have played b5 and continued with the plan, but instead I played bishop d6 first, white castles, and then I play pawn takes d4, because I actually realized here that if I don't take on d4, my opponent can always take my pawn, which was actually the best move for them, and that makes me move my bishop twice. And of course, it's not the end of the world that we have to move the bishop twice, but we lose a move, and we also help our opponents to open up their bishop. So it's actually better for us to take this, make them recapture, for example, with a pawn, and now this bishop is still blocked in, and at the same time, this has opened up a file, and it has opened up a diagonal. There is a very simple way how you can think about opening the position and activating your pieces. Whenever you trade a pawn, for example, this pawn, the things that will open up are the file in front of it and behind it, and then also the diagonals. So basically, whenever you remove a pawn from the board, you can use this to get an idea of what is actually going to open up. Is this a trade that benefits me? So after the trade, we can actually see exactly this. We do the trade, and this has given us this entire file. It has given us this diagonal, but also it has given us this diagonal towards the pawn. So that's how I always think about my pawn trades and how I visualize what is going to open up. Here I play b5, of course, since we want to eventually play bishop b7, knight e2, bishop b7, and then knight to e5. Okay. So as black, we achieved what we wanted. We have normal development of the pieces. And as you might notice, I have not castled so far. The reason why is usually I try to delay castling in my games, which is not what I would recommend you to do. I would recommend you to always castle as soon as you can on the first available move. Personally, I always delay castling because sometimes there are moves that are just a little bit sharper, a little bit more accurate than castling, if there is no need to do it yet. But that requires continuous calculation of possible sacrifices and attacks your opponents can set up, which is difficult. That's why most people recommend to just castle as soon as you can. So here I was thinking, what is white actually doing? Well, white is trying to set up a huge attack here. And if I play the move queen c7, which I did not play, but it's probably the most played move in this position, trying to put some pressure on the knight, suddenly white can start an attack. f4. Okay. Let's say we castle g4, and suddenly these pawns are rushing up the board, and they might kick my knight, meaning I have to move my knight, and then after I move my knight, I can already see trouble coming. This bishop, this queen, this knight, maybe even the rook could do something, and suddenly everything is opening up towards my position. And that was really something that I was concerned with, which is why I did not play the move queen to c7. Instead, here I try to think, is there any way how I can make it impossible for my opponent to play the move pawn to f4, or at least try to make it difficult for them? And there is actually such a move. I play to move queen to b6, and again, this is only possible because of the space that we have created earlier in the game. Space, again, meaning we push the pawns a little bit further, giving us this b6 square, because in the other variation, my pawns would be here, and I would not even have that square for the queen. So this shows how all of those very small decisions actually end up making a meaningful difference in your game. Why does queen b6 help stop our opponent from playing f4? Well, good puzzle. What happens if they play f4, which did not happen in the game? We have knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, bishop takes e5. And that's just a free pawn, because this is pinned to the king. So that is why this move queen b6 effectively stops this, as this would just be pinning that pawn, and that pawn can become a weakness. Also, by the way, this pawn would actually be attacked twice and only protected once. So that's another reason why this is a good move. Okay, so they don't have the move f4. They have to play, or they could play the move knight f3, which happened in the game. But this is already a little bit better for black, because this huge attack that we just had a look at with all these pawns storming down the board, it's probably not going to happen anymore, because the knight is already in front of the pawn. So here I just castled. The first moment I was considering castling, because there is no more huge attack coming, and I know that my king will be okay on this side of the board. There's no need to be afraid of anything. Here my opponent played knight takes c6, which I found confusing, because actually the best thing for white is to just keep as many pieces on the board as possible, and then try to still continue their attack. And having two knights is actually a crucial part of their attack. As soon as they lose one knight, the attack will always lose a little bit of its power. I was actually a little bit concerned with castling here, because there is a move that looks brilliant, but it's actually a blunder. It's the move knight to d7, and this is an amazing move. I'll show you why. Knight to d7 attacks my knight and my queen. It's actually a blunder, but it looked good, because if I take this, there is bishop takes h7, king takes h7, knight to g5, king to g8, and then queen to h5, and suddenly it looks like we are almost being checkmated. But I calculated that, well, my knight can just go back, and after my knight goes back, I attack the queen and I protect the square. So this doesn't work, but it's just one of those examples how having two knights could potentially benefit white for the attack. So exchanging this knight was somewhat strange, if you ask me, because there's no real benefit from it. Knight to e5. All right. And they are just replacing this with the other knight. Here I was thinking again for a while, how can I create something? Because as black, so far we have been on the defensive. But I felt like after this moment, after this exchange that they did, now it's time for us to go on the offensive and try to see if we could switch the game into our advantage. Which is why I played the move knight to e4. And it's actually a slight mistake because it's a little bit too early, but this was a very interesting move. I played knight to e4, and now we are going to arrive at the most crucial part, the most important lesson from this video. Why did I play knight to e4? Well, the plan was to have my opponent take. I was expecting them to take, which they did. And if they don't take, I still have a centralized knight, and this also opens up the f6 move if I want to kick that knight. But if they take, thinking that they are disrupting my pawn structure, they are actually helping me to get a winning advantage. I calculated incredibly deeply here and saw that I would just have a winning endgame. So pawn takes e4, and this structure is actually going to help black. Soon we are going to play f5. Then we are going to exchange the bishop for this knight, and the resulting position will be a position with an incredible amount of weak pawns for white, and we will pick up some of those pawns, and that's the crucial lesson that we will see in a moment. Opponent played queen h5, a mistake according to chess.com. It's not such a good move because it doesn't do much, and it actually allows black a very nice tactic, which is bishop back to e8. This saves the bishop from the knight's attack, which is good. We keep the bishop on the board, and it also sets up a threat. If my opponent just blindly plays any move, there is pawn f6, and pawn f6 attacks the knight with a discovery on the queen. So that's a nice tactic that we can set up. So basically the queen just has to go back, and my opponent wasted a move. Here I play this move f5, which is great. It's a great move because we achieve this resulting position, and then from here I will show you how I managed to turn this into a winning endgame. However, there was something better than f5, which is incredibly funny. I played this move a bit too quickly. After we play f5, like, take a mental picture of this. This is the position we have, and it's white to play. Okay, we could have actually played f6, knight g4, f5, knight e5, and look at this. It's the exact same position, but it's black to move. And that makes a huge difference. We actually win a full move if we do it in this sequence. The knight could also have gone back here, but that would actually be more trouble for them, as we could push the pawns up the board and then actually start our own attack. So actually funny here how I played the best plan, but playing f6 first gives us the exact same position with an extra move. So that's a bit sloppy here that I played f5 immediately. Black is just winning here in the endgame. White plays c4. We take the knight. This is already weakness number 1. This pawn is going to be a target for the rest of this game. Then we take on c4, and now we are creating weakness number 2. The queen actually can't take. If the queen takes, this would be a blunder because of the move bishop b5, which is a skewer tactic. Then if the queen moves a5, queen has to move, take, and eventually we win material. So the only thing white can do is take with the pawn. But look at this. 1 weakness, 2 weaknesses, 3 weaknesses. White is not going to survive this endgame. They have weak pawns all over the board. And now I'm going to slowly try to pick up the pawns. So this will be very interesting. Here I decided that it was crucial for me to control this square, the d1 square, because I don't want my opponent to get the open file, and then I can later challenge the open file. So I played the move bishop to a4, which is a great move controlling this square. However, of course, the computer always finds a more fancy move that also wins the game, which is actually bishop to h5. This is just an incredible move. Attacks the queen, attacks the square, and of course, if they take my bishop, I just take their bishop, which is actually a good trade for us. Because the only way that this endgame could still go wrong is if I exchange the queens and the rooks, and then we just play an endgame, but our bishops are opposite colored bishops, meaning they have a different color. That usually creates a lot of drawing chances for my opponent in this endgame. So I wanted to keep pieces on the board, but this is a genius way how you can actually exchange a light squared bishop for a dark squared bishop, which sounds impossible, but it is possible here. You can exchange a light squared bishop for a dark squared bishop, which is great. It's definitely something to remember for future games. Instead, I played this move, controlling the entry square. And then here you will see me slowly build up the pressure. There are some sharper moves, but I slowly build up the pressure and try to win the pawns. We just activate our pieces. We try to double our rooks so that we can put more pressure on that pawn. Some maneuvering. I also played queen d3 here, which is a very nice move. I knew that my opponent wanted to trade because, again, the trade gets him closer to the opposite colored bishop draw. But if they trade, my pawn comes forward, and now we have a passed pawn 2 squares away from promotion, which I can also connect with my bishop. And this is really devastating. If I get this on the board, black is winning. So that was the plan. My opponent, however, did not take. Instead, they played the move c5, which is good because they are turning this into a dark squared pawn instead of a light squared pawn. I did make some slight inaccuracies here. There were actually sharper ways to win the pawn, but still black is always better in this endgame. Rook here, and this actually sets up a very nice trap, this connection of the rook and the queen. So my goal here was to set up a trap. Let me just make a bad move for white. This would be a bad move. This would actually be a mistake. Why is this a mistake? We immediately win a pawn. Rook takes c5. That's just a free pawn. Because if the rook takes back, we take the queen, rook takes, check, and checkmate. So there was actually some back rank weakness for my opponent. So my plan was to just double the pieces and then see if I could win this pawn and then do the back rank checkmate if they take it, or just, of course, probably just win the pawn, since I don't think my opponent would have let me do the back rank mate. But that's the goal. We want to pick up this pawn. However, my opponent saw this, and I think they saw this at least, and they played bishop to e3, which solves everything as it adds an extra defender here to this pawn. All right, rook d5, attacking 2 weaknesses. We just keep putting pressure. And then eventually here my opponent collapsed from this point by playing the move f4. But my opponent was also incredibly low on time at this moment. Basically, black loses anyways. The endgame is always better for black. I mean, white loses anyways. I think I missaid that. But white loses anyways. The endgame is always better for black. But this makes it easy. f4 looks like it holds everything together, but it loses to a very simple move. En passant, we take the pawn, they take back, and then here we can just win eventually one of the pawns. I decided to trade queens knowing that this was not the best move, because in these endgames, as I said, we have to avoid the draw. Even if we are up a pawn, we could still get a draw because of those opposite colored bishops. So the plan is really keep pieces on the board, but I really thought, like, look, I'll take this, they will take back, I'll take this free pawn, I am winning this endgame, even though that I just exchanged the queens. It's a bit more complicated, actually, than I thought, but black is winning. This also sets up another nice trap. Let's say white makes a bad move, pawn to f4. Attack the bishop, and if it moves, well, we win the rook. So that's another nice trick. Again, my opponent saw it. They played king to f2, rook to d5, rook to b2, and then I played e5. The plan behind e5 was actually to see if I could trap this bishop. So if they make any random move, for example, again, this blunder move, h3, I play pawn here, and this actually, well, almost traps the bishop. The bishop would have to go back here, but after the bishop goes here, now we are just picking up this pawn. And after we pick up the pawn, we can even exchange a bit, and we are going to win that endgame since we are up 2 pawns. There is a super complex way here how my opponent could actually equalize by playing rook b4 and then trying to trap that bishop. I'll quickly show it to you. Rook b4, if I go here, there is a4. It's annoying. And if I go here, there is a whole sequence there, but eventually it leads to something like this, and I actually end up losing the extra pawn temporarily, then winning it back. It's complicated, but this would have been the best opportunity for my opponent. Instead, they played king g2, and from here the game is over. Again, rook d3. Look at all of these weaknesses. There are weaknesses all over the board. We already picked up one of the pawns. Now we are going to pick up the second pawn. Maybe soon we will be picking up the third pawn. Black just wins this endgame. And I had foreseen all of this from the very moment that I decided to play that knight e4 move. Just not this endgame that deep, of course, but the fact that we would get this position with the three weaknesses, and that somehow, some way, I would be able to pick up all of the pawns. I had faith in that. And here the game is actually over. My opponent, I think, had like 30 seconds left, played bishop g5, which is a straight up blunder, I think. Like chess.com gives it a check mark. Like, good move, but it basically just blunders the bishop. This is a pin. We attack the pinned piece, and we are going to win the pinned piece. And from there, we are already up a bishop now, a bishop and a pawn, which is great. And then eventually, I think with like 2 or 3 seconds left, my opponent gave me a check. I had expected it because, of course, bishop takes e8, wins the rook, and then that's game over. So very interesting game. The crucial lesson from this game is really that pawn structure that we saw after that f5 move, and how you can turn a position like this into a winning endgame. So just quickly, after this game, I am currently still in first place in my club championship. You can see the standings here, but it's a shared first place